more. When I first read that book, I puzzled over who those 60 million were. I thought that must be the number of slaves that were in this country, because of course, beloved, it's the story of a slave in this country. But then I heard Toni Morrison interviewed, and she said, no, that's not the number of slaves in this country. That's the number of slaves who never made it here. That's the number of slaves who died on the boats in what is called the Middle Passage and were thrown into the water before they ever got here. And she was criticized after she wrote that book because a number of people said that's a gross exaggeration. But most of the historians she checked with have said, no, that's not an exaggeration. That is pretty much a middle range. You see, we don't know how many were killed. Why? Because when you have throwaway cargo, you don't count them. There are people who remember going up the Congo River during this time period when there were so many bodies they could hardly get their boat up the river. These are throwaway people. You go to Africa, you get more slaves than you need to make a profit. You know some of them are going to die on the way home or the way back to wherever you're going with them. And what do you do with them when they die? You unchain them and throw them in the water. You unchain them and throw them in the water. Awful, amazing, horrendous, right? One of the things that we tend not to think about. One of the things that we don't want to think about. But all of this is connected, right? When you begin to view people as expendable, when you begin to view people as less than human, then you can justify things like that. It's a little what this novel is about. How do you get to the point? How do you get to the point when you can begin to justify these things? There's horrific cruelty in the Congo, in the Belgian Congo. There's a picture of a young child who has no hand on his left hand. Bunch of pictures of children with no hands. Now, why do they not have hands?
If they stole, they can.
Pardon? If they were not fast enough in in collecting ivory or stripping rubber off the rubber plants, the punishment was to have their hands cut off. There's a picture taken in 1904. It's still going on. Conrad went in 1890 and was horrified by what he saw. But it's still going on in 1904. The gentleman on the right over there is a missionary. The gentleman on the left is a missionary. The people standing between the missionaries are citizens of the Congo, and what they're holding hands. These are hands that have been cut off and thrown in the ditch. So they're trying to give graphic demonstration that what King Leopold has been doing for how long? Years and years, 20, 30 years, that what King Leopold has been doing is horrific because nobody's listening, right? It's still a controversy. King Leopold's statue was in the Congo not too long ago, and they couldn't decide whether to leave it there or take it down. So there's still people who say, no, it wasn't that bad. That picture, I don't know about you, but that picture's enough to convince me. Now, this is Marlowe's description, and this is some of what Marlowe sees when he goes up the Congo River. And this is a description that probably came right out of Conrad's experience. But what I've done when I have put this into the PowerPoint is I have italicized the words that refer to the people. And I want you to see if you can tell me when I finish reading it to you what characteristic all those words have. They were dying slowly. It was very clear. They were not enemies. They were not criminals. They were nothing earthly now. Nothing but black shadows of disease and starvation, lying confusedly in the greenish gloom, brought from all recesses of the coast in all the legality of time contracts, lost in uncongenial surroundings. fed on unfamiliar food, they sickened, became inefficient, and were then allowed to crawl away and rest. These moribund shapes were free as air and nearly as thin. I began to distinguish the gleam of eyes under the trees. Then glancing down, I saw a face near my hand. The black bones reclined at full length with one shoulder against the tree, and slowly the eyelids rose and the sunken eyes looked up at me, enormous and vacant, a kind of blind white flicker in the depths of the orbs, which died out slowly. The man seemed young, almost a boy. But you know, with them, it's hard to tell. I found nothing else to do but to offer him one of my good Swede's ship's biscuits I had in my pocket. The fingers closed slowly on it and held. There was no other movement and no other glance. What he's seeing is some of the 10 million dying, right? Some of the 10 million dying. What about the words that I italicized? What's significant about it? I get to walk around again while y'all answer the question. What's significant about it? They're pieces of people. Kelly? Kelly. Got it. You got it too. They're pieces of people. This is one reason the novel has been criticized since about 1975, particularly by the writer, the Nigerian writer, Achebe, who wrote Things Fall Apart. Because his complaint is that Conrad never gives us a whole person. He gives us pieces. Now, what figure of speech is that? Does anybody know? Our budding English students out there. Synecdoche, which means a part for the whole, right? Rather than saying, I'm looking out at an audience of people, I say, I'm looking out on hundreds of eyes, right? You take a person apart. Now, one thing that I'm not sure that Achebe gets in his criticism, and of course there have been people who have defended Conrad against that criticism, is these are not Conrad's words. They're Marlowe's words. That's the wonderful thing about being a writer. You can just sort of back out and let somebody else tell the story. And that person becomes a character in his own right. And you, as reader, you have to figure out, what does Conrad think? Well, you don't know. Isn't that wonderful? The writer just gets to sort of back out. But the point of bringing this in at this point in the discussion is that this is probably a very real description of an area that Conrad went through when he went up the Congo River. Why did it affect him for the rest of his life? Why did he never get over it? Why did he never have a thought in his head until he went there? Because he saw something like this. Because he had to see it. He had to deal with it. Okay, what happened? What brought about change? There was really quite a campaign to eradicate cruelty in the Congo, even though it was not successful until about 1909. There is an advertisement, and you can see the inscription under it is in the rubber coils, and you have an African citizen there standing, and he is ensnarled in a snake, and if you look at the head of the snake, right up there, that is King Leopold. And many people in this country were outraged by what was going on. One in particular was Mark Twain. And you can find on the internet, if you're interested, or if you're doing a paper and you want to use this, Twain wrote a savage attack on King Leopold. It was called King Leopold's Soliloquy, in which he denounced everything that was going on in the Congo. And so eventually something happened. Okay, now I'm going to stop and we're going to move a bit. We're going to move to the novel. That's the backdrop.